Hollywood remembers its rebels with the same reverence it reserves for its kings. Quentin Tarantino belongs to both categories, an outlaw who became establishment, a fanboy who grew into a maestro. His films bleed with references, stitched together from decades of cinema, pulp, and pop culture. Yet for all his encyclopedic devotion to the medium, Tarantino has always been territorial about collaboration. He may steal, homage, and borrow, but he will not compromise. For him, filmmaking is not a committee. It is a battleground where vision either survives intact or dies by dilution. And Tarantino has never hidden his contempt for those who, in his eyes, threaten the purity of cinema. Some of these directors are legends, others cult figures. All share a place on Tarantino's private blacklist, men he has publicly mocked, dismissed, or rejected outright. What happens when one of Hollywood's most fearless voices draws a line against his own heroes, peers, and rivals? What stories lie behind these rejections? And what does it reveal about Tarantino's legacy, the contradictions, the obsessions, the endless fight for control? Here are the 6 directors Quentin Tarantino has sworn he will never work with again, and the reasons their names are burned into his cinematic memory.
I would love to talk to him. I don't think he would, but he has a different view of history.
Oliver Stone, the provocateur Tarantino never forgave. Tarantino admired Stone's audacity, but he despised what Stone did with his words. Natural-Born Killers, written from Tarantino's early script, was transformed into a political opera. For Tarantino, this was not collaboration. It was theft with credit attached. He called it a mutilation of his work, a director hijacking vision for ego. Stone's obsession with message over story collided with Tarantino's belief that character should always lead. The wound never healed, and Tarantino swore he would never let Stone near his imagination again. Their divide became a parable about the fragile line between adaptation and violation. Tarantino's original script was pulpy and lean, built around irony, black humor, and controlled bursts of violence. Stone seized that frame and reconstructed it with rapid-fire edits, fractured timelines, and indulgent symbolism. The result was a film drenched in politics and hallucinatory excess. What Tarantino had envisioned as satire became, in his words, a hammer hitting you in the face. For Tarantino, the betrayal was personal. He considered screenwriting sacred, the DNA of a film. Watching Stone hijack his script felt like desecration. He compared it to seeing someone else walk around in your skin. Stone, unapologetic, argued he had elevated the material into something greater. To Tarantino, that dismissal was proof of arrogance, the very hubris he despised in Hollywood. Both men saw themselves as renegades, distrustful of studios, protective of vision. But their philosophies diverged. Stone wielded cinema as a political sermon. Tarantino shaped it into pop mythology, meant to thrill first and resonate later. That philosophical canyon ensured they would never align. In Tarantino's memory, Oliver Stone was not simply a director he avoided, he was the one who taught him never to surrender control again.
I never get to do that. Made 16 movies.
Kevin Smith, the indie peer turned ideological rival. Both men rose from video store culture, fluent in cinema's language. Yet where Tarantino chased operatic violence, Smith built lo-fi comedy of talk and irony. Tarantino once dismissed Smith's films as not cinema, but filmed conversation, a critique that cut deep in indie circles. The rivalry was never about talent, it was philosophy. Smith's slacker minimalism, born of budget, stood in sharp contrast to Tarantino's maximalist spectacle. To Tarantino, cinema was mythic. To Smith, it was mundane. The divide was irreconcilable. Their careers unfolded almost in parallel. Tarantino erupted at Sundance in 1992 with Reservoir Dogs, a razor-edged crime saga. 2 years later, Smith premiered Clerks, shot in black and white on credit cards. Both were celebrated as indie miracles, proof that outsiders could rewrite Hollywood's rules. Yet the contrast was glaring. Tarantino embraced cinematic tradition, tracking shots, pop culture soliloquies, operatic violence. Smith leaned into still frames and endless banter about superheroes and dating. To Tarantino, this was not rebellion, but resignation. He believed cinema demanded scale, even on a shoestring. Characters should feel larger than life, their words echoing like arias. Smith, by contrast, found meaning in the mundane, in capturing lives that barely moved beyond a convenience store counter. Critics hailed his authenticity. Tarantino saw it as anti-cinematic, a refusal to use film's power to transcend reality. Their tension never erupted into public war, but it lingered. Smith occasionally praised Tarantino while joking about their differences, while Tarantino rarely mentioned Smith at all. The silence spoke volumes. Two clerks, two futures. One stormed toward spectacle, the other stayed rooted in ordinariness. That divergence, born in the same era, ensured they would never converge again.
It's not really very satirical. You know, it may have an occasional individual gag in it, which is a satirical joke.
Woody Allen, the legend Tarantino refused to bow to. Tarantino grew up watching Allen's neurotic comedies and Manhattan romances, but admiration soured with time. In interviews, he accused Allen of retreating into repetition, recycling themes instead of pushing the form forward. More than that, Tarantino has said he could not imagine working with Allen because his personal scandals stained the art. "I don't separate it," Tarantino once suggested. For him, cinema is sacred, and contamination, whether creative stagnation or moral corruption, cannot be excused. The divide was as much aesthetic as ethical. Tarantino thrived on risk, each new project bending genre into something unstable, dangerous, alive. Allen, once a radical voice with Annie Hall and Manhattan, seemed to Tarantino to settle into cycles, variations on the same themes of neurosis, romance, and self-doubt. What had once been innovation hardened into predictability. To Tarantino, that stagnation was unforgivable. Cinema demanded evolution, not repetition. Then came scandal. As allegations and controversies clouded Allen's later career, Tarantino did not soften. While many peers sidestepped judgment, he made clear that he could not imagine separating an artist's personal life from their work. For a director who viewed cinema as myth, to collaborate with someone under such shadows would tarnish his own legacy. And yet, Tarantino's refusal was not shouted. It was quiet, deliberate. He acknowledged Allen's influence on earlier generations, but refused to offer homage. To bow to Allen would be to validate both the stagnation of his art and the stains on his personal story. For Tarantino, reverence without integrity was no reverence at all. In the end, Woody Allen represented a cautionary figure, a legend who shaped comedy, but one Tarantino refused to align with. Proof that even giants can fall from a pedestal when art and life collapse together.
You guys can be a little more inventive with your cameras next time, okay? Well, let's see. Let's see what do you got? What should we do?
Michael Bay, the spectacle Tarantino despised. If Tarantino worships film history, Bay worships explosions. To Tarantino, Bay embodied everything wrong with modern Hollywood: fast cuts, loud noise, hollow emotion. He once mocked Bay's films as theme park rides rather than stories, dismissing them as pure commerce. For Tarantino, cinema is about characters who breathe, bleed, and talk. Bay's heroes blow things up. That chasm was so wide it became personal, a rejection not just of Bay's style but of what he represented, the dominance of spectacle over soul. The contrast is striking. Tarantino's films linger on dialogue, on characters talking their way into tension before violence finally erupts. Bay's films sprint toward destruction, explosions arriving before the audience has time to care why. Where Tarantino crafted monologues that echo pulp history, Bay delivered quick edits and slow-motion fireballs. Tarantino once quipped, "They're rides, not movies." Tarantino has often spoken of his love for 70s cinema, where grit and character anchored even the wildest plots. Bay, by contrast, represented to him the triumph of marketing, films designed as trailers stretched to feature length. The robot battles of Transformers, the endless destruction of Armageddon, were spectacles that devoured character. To Tarantino, this was the ultimate betrayal, cinema stripped of soul. And yet, Bay's dominance made the rejection more pointed. Hollywood adored his box office returns, but Tarantino's silence was louder than any insult. By refusing association, he drew a line between art and commerce, myth and machinery. Michael Bay became, in Tarantino's imagination, a symbol of what happens when Hollywood forgets its history. A director who chose size over story, velocity over vision. For Tarantino, that was not just a style he disliked. It was a future he refused to be part of.
Hello everyone, I'm John Woo.
John Woo, the idol who became too close to copy. In the 1990s, Tarantino praised Woo's Hong Kong films with near-religious fervor. The doves, the dual pistols, the balletic violence, these shaped Tarantino's own visual lexicon. Yet when Woo came to Hollywood, Tarantino kept his distance. He feared proximity would reduce him to an imitator. In interviews, he admitted Woo was too important for him to work with. It was rejection born of respect, but rejection nonetheless. For Tarantino, working with Woo would be like competing with the mirror that made him. Woo's A Better Tomorrow and The Killer redefined cinematic action, turning gunfights into ballet, blood into poetry. Tarantino, steeped in American pulp and grindhouse tradition, found in Woo's work the stylistic permission he needed. Slow motion, choreographed chaos, the juxtaposition of tenderness and carnage, Tarantino absorbed it all. By the time Reservoir Dogs and Pulp Fiction arrived, the Woo imprint was unmistakable. But admiration carried risk. Tarantino once explained that to collaborate with Woo would be to risk imitation instead of originality. He confessed, "He's too important to me. I can't work with him." Woo's techniques were already so woven into his DNA that partnership could only blur the line between influence and theft. For a filmmaker obsessed with authorship, that was unacceptable. Ironically, when Woo crossed into Hollywood with films like Face Off and Mission Impossible 2, Tarantino's reverence only deepened. But he kept his distance, acknowledging that their paths, though parallel, should never overlap. It was not animosity, but a kind of protective reverence, Tarantino shielding himself from the danger of collapsing into his hero's shadow. In Tarantino's blacklist, John Woo is the exception, a name not barred by bitterness but by fear of losing the very individuality that defines him.
Standing here with you, I can read your face and I can see what you understand, and if I say something...
Lars von Trier, the provocateur who crossed Tarantino's line. Von Trier and Tarantino met at Cannes, a festival where both thrived on provocation. Yet Tarantino bristled at von Trier's disdain for Hollywood storytelling. When von Trier joked about sympathizing with dictators during a press conference, Tarantino's silence was icy. He later remarked that von Trier's cinema lacked joy, that it punished rather than entertained. Tarantino's own films may be violent, but they are playful, operatic, alive. Von Trier's cruelty repelled him. He once quipped he would never stand behind a camera with him. The contrast could not be sharper. Tarantino's films embrace excess, but they are designed to thrill, every act of violence underlined with wit, music, and rhythm. Von Trier, by contrast, weaponized discomfort. From Breaking the Waves to Dogville, he stripped cinema of pleasure, turning it into an exercise in endurance. To Tarantino, this was cinema that demanded suffering rather than offering spectacle. He once declared, "His films punish, not entertain." The Cannes clash solidified the divide. Tarantino, serving as jury president in 2004, found himself fielding von Trier's provocations directly. While Tarantino defended boldness in cinema, he bristled at von Trier's self-seriousness, provocation not as art, but as antagonism. For a director who built his reputation on reinvention, von Trier's brand of cruelty felt hollow. There was also the matter of joy. Tarantino insisted his films, however violent, were meant to be fun. Von Trier dismissed entertainment as frivolous, seeking to shock instead. That divide was irreconcilable. In the end, Tarantino placed von Trier among the few he openly rejected, not for lack of talent, but for lack of joy. For Tarantino, cinema is a celebration. For Von Trier, it is punishment. And that, more than scandal or style, was the line Tarantino refused to cross. Quentin Tarantino's blacklist is more than a record of grudges. It is a reflection of his code, authorship, originality, and the defense of cinema as something larger than spectacle or scandal. Each refusal reveals what he values most, a belief that filmmaking must remain personal, joyful, and uncompromised. Oliver Stone showed him the danger of losing his voice. Kevin Smith, the limits of smallness against myth. Woody Allen, the cost of repetition and reputation. Michael Bay, the emptiness of spectacle. John Woo, the risk of worshipping too closely. And Lars von Trier, the rejection of joy. What do you think of Tarantino's refusals? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And if you want to explore more untold stories of cinema, subscribe to join us. Cinema remembers not just who you work with, but who you refuse.